Dear sister or brother who grew up white in the USA or Germany or any other first world country, born into a more or less functional family of privilege and power, where you never personally suffered a day of discrimination, hunger, physical violence, or oppression, yet have the audacity to proclaim that you understand any part of what people who had none of your advantages experience. You judge them and choose to side with your tribe unconditionally despite their clear criminalities, with an entitlement that comes from your pathological adherence to tribalism. I extend my empathy out to you in that I realize, as an innocent child, you have been so heavily brainwashed and indoctrinated by your unconscious family from a very early age when you had zero agency to think or decide for yourself. Your programming is so diffused into every cell in your body, making it virtually impossible for you to undo it as an adult. To understand your willful ignorance and alliance with your tribe, even when it's the oppressor, and as an adult, preserving your regressive programming from childhood, we need to start from the genesis of how this benefits your ego and your archaic, primal, spiritually less evolved parts, and why your prognosis is grim until you consciously decide to evolve into a higher spiritual realm. Humans, as typical pack animals, since the beginning of time have formed tribes and alliances in tune with their social nature and for the benefits of social cooperation in meeting their needs. And as a group, a pack or tribe, sometimes it made sense, or they were forced to leave the territories the tribe claimed in search of a new place to inhabit, just called immigration. Typically, throughout history, people immigrated with the sense of their tribal affiliations intact, because essentially in foreign territory, preserving identity became a sort of psychological self-defense born out of an emotional need to draw strength from their original alliances. New environments and contact with other tribes can naturally evoke feelings of fear and insecurity and subsequent defensiveness for the newcomers, which can make the individuals therein become more vulnerable to regressive forms of unhealthy ego attachments to identity or whatever they deem is powerful enough to make them feel safer in a way a child wants to be embraced by an adult on the first day of kindergarten. Holding on to tribe consciousness as a source of pride and security, and this is entirely rooted in an emotional need, like a child's, to be favored, to be protected, to be set apart than the rest, is an immature thing to do. We are so dependent on others during the formative years of our lives for our survival that no wonder this becomes our default setting soon as we feel threatened. This is something that a healthy individual would outgrow as an adult, you would think. And as adults, we can certainly utilize our hopefully increased emotional intelligence in order to communicate and cooperate better with people who are different than us. Humans have always occupied the earth as divided into separate tribes, and the moment a tribe was formed and labeled as separate, the differences and the gap of understanding between tribes began to widen. The general cognitive bias of the human condition is its default negativity towards the unknown, the unfamiliar, the different. This means it must take an extraordinary effort to unlearn this bias and to turn that negative, perhaps initially to a sense of curiosity, to eventually recognize a common thread of humanity among people, often with merely superficial differences. But this absolutely requires an open, relaxed, and loving heart, typically only available to healthy and happy people. A good example is the Hawaiian people who greeted the first white Western invaders with warmth and hospitality, only to fall prey to cold and sick-hearted society, who saw their differences as threat and returned the warm welcome with looting and destruction. The white colonizers adhered to the toxic us versus them mentality that regarded themselves as superior. Through colonization, looting, and forcefully taking things away from people out of greed, they lowered the earth's vibration for the worse and caused many otherwise open-hearted people's hearts to close and planted seeds of hatred, when they could have instead all just shared everything as one big community of sisters and brothers. When we examine the prevalence of tribal mentality throughout history, we see that it has only gotten more toxic since the introduction of Abrahamic one-God religions, which invented a bunch of schizophrenic texts to cite and proclaim themselves as a superior tribe favored by God, chosen by God, written by other spiritually undeveloped, insecure men with lust for power that only reinforced and imprinted on uneducated and impressionable minds, and these low-vibrating souls, this idea of separatist, tribalist, exclusivist mentality. Men, I say men because another name for this system is patriarchy. They created laws, waged endless wars, and caused immense suffering thanks to this pathologically, politically, and militarily reinforced and legitimized way of control and dominance. Today, we still do not question our tribal instincts or ever stop to think how we could cooperate in sharing our resources and get along better with those who seem different than us. It is indeed very easy to understand why there's so much hate between particular tribes of the world, and why a greater amount of hate energy accumulates around a specific identity, which unfortunately those who identify as such continue to live in utter denial of why they become objects of hate, and why their emotionally stunted and ego-driven instincts will continue to make them unconsciously hold on to their victim narratives and choose to preserve their complaining rights over fixing the underlying reasons why they inspire hate in others. They refuse to see that the over-identification with their tribe is exactly why they feel outed, othered, and disliked, and that every time they speak from ego using phrases such as my people, my culture, my this and my that, in terms only to underline their differences in an underlying motive to refer to their superiority, they solidify and multiply that hate energy. Anytime they act out of sheer concern for self-preservation at the cost of anyone else's safety, they grow what they pretend to want to get rid of. Every time they refuse to love and share life and create a family with anyone outside their tribe or refuse to do mutually benefiting businesses with, they not only engage in varying levels of pathological practices such as incest and nepotism, but also put up more walls and close more hearts and generate more dysfunction in the world. And wherever these people reside, they create a feedback loop where they don't feel welcomed because they keep their heart to the other closed, and they continue to become more tribalistic because they don't feel welcome in their new land originally occupied by people who wouldn't hate them as much if they were more inclusive, ethical, and loving towards them. I refer to the tribal instinct as pathological because the more tribal one behaves, the more insecurity and an inner sense of powerless they suffer from. A great example to me was demonstrated in the character analysis of a 45-year-old guy I knew who was the son of a Jewish doctor and an Irish housewife. He clearly was oozing with insecurity, and everything he said sounded like reading off a defendant's text in a jury trial where he had to prove he was better than everyone else. He couldn't emotionally regulate himself, took everything as a personal attack, was diagnosed with ADHD, had very poor impulse control, had extreme argumentativeness, he was emotionally needy and manipulative, not to mention, he was a compulsive liar and lacked empathy for others. Clearly a narcissist, he unwittingly had exposed himself to me, one time revealing how much he hated his father, who he described to have a very similar personality as him. Nonetheless, he always introduced himself as a 100% member of his father's tribe when he met new people and talked endlessly about his father's so-called achievements in the medical field. He would avoid mentioning his mother, who was Irish, because she provided him with no sense of pride and superiority. His narcissistic father, through a vicarious identification with him, would provide his ego. This guy deep down felt like such a loser, such a non-worthy man that he was emotionally dependent on identifying his ego with a tribal affiliation he imagined to present power and success he could never achieve on his own. This guy had no success in the interpersonal or career realm, but he was always able to use his tribal connection to manipulate people into supporting him despite his lack of merit. He would bring up his tribe of identification so much and so often, but only when it would socially benefit him. His personality was sort of a microcosmic example of the collective pathology that ails anyone with the insecure, tribalist, obsessive, and fanatic mindset. I think it's important to be aware that this sort of mindset, combined with an extroverted, flamboyant, overconfident, and self-entitled personality who puts themselves out there more than anyone else, can easily become more visible, thus more materially successful in our current patriarchal capitalist society. While no doubt our socioeconomic system itself is pathological and is built to reward the loudest and most powerful instead of the most qualified. I once knew a street dog who was stabbed and badly hurt by a short man with gray hair. That dog was so traumatized that he would randomly bark and sometimes attack other passerby men with the same physical traits. After a while, complaints multiplied, and the municipality took him away to dump at a horrible place. I used to feed this dog and loved him, so I went to pick him up from where he was dumped and placed him in a better shelter where, by sheer good luck, the main care staff person was another short man with gray hair. What happened after a few weeks there was incredible. This dog got fed and cared for by this man and completely stopped being reactive towards the other men who looked like him anymore. Now, take this analogy and apply it to the conflict in the Middle East or between any two species or ethnicities or genders, etc. What it would take to end such animosity would only take the image of the aggressor to improve in the eyes of the victim, in the same way that the dog was given a reason not to see men of the short, gray-haired tribe as enemies anymore. Imagine being hurt by the same kind of being, not just once, but over and over and in different ways. How will you react? What kind of opinion will you form of them? What kind of feeling being in their presence will generate inside you, especially when they display those traumatic behaviors that you predict they will anyway? Imagine a culture that is so monolithic, so self-absorbed, so self-preserving, so exclusivist, so defensive, so righteous, so traumatized that it is extra hard for the individuals exposed to it to escape its stronghold over their hearts and intellects. Imagine such extreme levels of emotional depravity that sees no problem in inflicting and brainwashing their children with emotionally abusive ideas such as, the world hates you. So always have your guard up and never trust, marry, or do business with anyone outside our tribe, aka the only people who won't hate us because everyone else is our enemy. Or we have to excel and have materialistic power over everything and everyone so that we never feel lesser or more deprived than others again. Or accumulate all the money and social security because nothing is more important than life. Imagine being brainwashed with such heavy indoctrination, with such emphasis on material values, such as money and power or social status and degrees or titles, regardless of how spiritually bankrupt one may get in the process of attaining those. Since pursuing these things in modern world almost guarantees that one cheats, lies, steals opportunities that would otherwise be granted to those with actual merit. In my opinion, achieving worldly gains not through sheer merit, but mainly through tribal support is no real success in life, and not acknowledging the role of this is instead monetary success signals nothing but moral poverty. So what else fuels the fire of fate? Let's all admit, no one likes people who are stingy because especially us women know that stinginess correlates with stinginess of heart. People who have not healed from past emotional wounds caused by perhaps generational poverty and still live in a scarcity mindset cannot receive or give love. If an entire tribe of people collectively give out this type of deprived, defensive, self-preserving, and fearful energy, they will not be receiving a lot of love and compassion in return. Remember what kind of people make dogs reactive and aggressive, the anxious and the fearful, because the anxious and fearful are always more likely to hurt them first. Now, it is the tribe that fuels the negative perceptions? No, it's absolutely the behavior that does. If you live in a house whose owner certainly has the money to fix a broken window to prevent cold air from entering, but refuses to do it out of stinginess, you feel less cared for. And imagine everyone who identifies with that owner's tribe displaying similar behaviors such as penny pinching around your needs, valuing his money over ensuring your comfort, or owning a successful business and inviting you there only to have you pay for the food you ate, even while you're broke. Or imagine being employed by these people at different jobs and all of them treat you with the same type of mobbing while they hide from you all the details of how they favor their own tribesmen, practically taking advantage of your cheap labor as if you're their wage slave, because it is very much present in their tribal text that they adhere to, a justification for why they're allowed to see their tribesmen as above and superior and non-tribesmen as okay to enslave in servitude of the benefit of their tribe. Imagine, despite being more talented and qualified, being denied a position granted to the nepotist benefactor. Imagine having to hear over and over the same kind of hypocrisy from people who identify with a specific tribe to say they don't believe in God, but then use some archaic made-up religious text as sufficient justification to steal land from someone else. Imagine them calling themselves atheists and then sending their kids to Bible schools where they're indoctrinated by those very texts whose intellectual relevance they deny, but expose those kids to the ideas mentioned in those very texts. They then hide and deny this infliction behind a veneer of, well, it's just my cultural heritage and I must show loyalty. Then imagine those poor kids slowly become less and less loving and accepting of everyone else outside their tribe and start saying things like, that's against my religion, those people don't like us, I don't like them. Imagine all these experiences inescapably form an idea of what people of that tribe represent for you based on all the negativity they brought to your life. Again, it's not the tribe, the ethnic identity, or the culture, or the color of the skin, but what those who identify themselves as a member of that group chose to display in the ways they interact with the world around them that fuels hate. And if there was a correlation between strengthening the in-group bonds and out-group bonds simultaneously, tribalism wouldn't hold the negative connotation it does. Additionally, a tribe could just as well be a mere alliance formed against a common enemy amongst people who don't otherwise love or care for each other. So hatred could very much be the common core foundation a tribal connection is built on. Empathy, camaraderie, and in-group sympathy goes hand in hand with xenophobia and even fascism, as if there are two sides of the same coin. Even new mothers now equipped with generous amounts of empathy and love for their children can become a lot less loving and empathic towards everyone else, especially when remotely considered to be a threat to their own children. Does favoring our own make us better? Absolutely not. Being very good and loyal to your own family, community, or tribe while being horrible to anyone else you deem as other makes you a good person? No. Is the father loving and attentive to his kids who, for work, pushes buttons of a remotely controlled drone that drop deadly artillery over innocent civilians a good father? No. Is the special breed dog's owner who doesn't care about the well-being of stray dogs a dog lover? No. Stealing from others to feed your own children does not make you a good mother. There's nothing to lament about the hate that is generated by seeing someone elevate oneself and his own kin at the expense of others. It's unjust to use this kind of self-manufactured and perpetuated hate as the righteous ownership of a perpetual victim card. We all have a moral duty to examine the way we have been indoctrinated to look at humanity through the us versus them lenses. People owe their children an emotionally safe upbringing in a mental environment of inclusivity and free thinking, and refrain from any transference of animosity or fear of a particular group. If a mother teaches her child to fear dogs because she had a bad experience with a dog once, she may rob that child of a life of immense love and joy that dogs bring to the child's life. This is exactly what parents who indoctrinate their kids with the ridiculous pathological ideas of their tribes do. As a 4-time serial immigrant who was blessed with an upbringing that never instilled that us versus them thinking about our nationality, culture, or religion, I grew up free of all that pathology. I was nonetheless aware of how prevalent tribalism was around me. As a Turk, I was supposed to favor Muslims over Christians and be wary of Greeks. When I lived in Germany for almost 7 years, I experienced racism firsthand. Even so, I didn't use that as an excuse to become more strongly emotionally identified with my own background. I never saw my ethnic identity as something I had to defend. I never felt threatened, even I could see it, how it threatened a fearful German. And I could see that many Germans were fearful and more covertly tribal, and their official response to the conflict in the Middle East was mainly the self-interest of preserving their object of redemption, thereby protecting themselves against their own guilt-ridden conscience over their former historical crimes. But I have zero desire to attach my ego to any particular identity. I not only have zero negativity towards Greeks, who are indeed the same exact people as Turks. In fact, I learned Greek and I love everything about the Greek culture. I have friends whose religious beliefs are at complete odds with me, and I still love them just the same. And when I have conflicts with humans, I look at it through an objective lens of individual considerations. Problematic behaviors whose harm I couldn't effectively communicate, or their lack of effort to change the behavior, is always the cause, and not their chosen identity or tribal affiliation. Admittedly, I personally have been very much hurt by people of the specific tribe I referred to above. Not to mention bearing witness to the criminalities they engage in the Middle East, and still no way feel justified to hate or discriminate against them as a group. If I can live free of tribalism virus after 25 years of living as an immigrant among completely foreign tribes to the one I came from, so can you. I'd like to conclude this heavy text with a heartfelt prayer of healing for those suffering from tribalism, because wanting to support your fellow human beings should not come at the cost of others' rights and freedoms, and anyone who feels justified in doing that is sick in the soul. The hellhole that is the Middle East is the perfect example of what this pathology can give rise to at its extreme version. So please, go heal and stop saying shit like my people versus their people. Stop putting up walls around you by constantly reminding everyone of your differences. Heal so you don't pass your traumas on to your children. Just remember, all people are equally idiotic and lame, and none of us will ever be as cool as the average dog.